The White Witch of Spiton and the Serpent of Anata, Book 1, Chapter 3. Sandra flipped greasy rashers of bacon that spat and sizzled into the hot frying pan, happily singing along to her favourite record that played loudly through the crackling radio. Although her so-called singing was ear-piercingly out of tune, Sandra thought it sad that her musical talent hadn't yet been recognised. It was Billy's favourite meal of the day. A blowout fried breakfast, bacon, sausages, eggs and beans never failed to draw Billy to the breakfast table. Billy never appeared on time, nor did he ever sit and eat his food at a reasonably steady pace. Each morning, Sandra would constantly remind him of important books that he needed to take to school, and then sniff Billy's stale breath, hoping to catch a faint whiff of toothpaste. Breakfast was constantly manic. Billy greedily shoved food into his mouth and continued chewing it as he lazily strolled off to school. By the time he had left, Sandra usually collapsed in a heap, feeling worn out. Frank sat eating at the kitchen table. "Any more bacon, love?" he asked, mopping tomato sauce off his plate with a slice of thickly buttered bread. "Nah, we can't afford it, Frank. And keep your beady eyes off this slightest, Billy boys," she warned. Looking peeved, Frank slapped another piece of bread onto his empty plate, smothering it with a heaped spoonful of runny strawberry jam. Favouritism, he thought. "Billy boy," shouted Sandra, serving up the food. "Your breakfast ready?" Billy miraculously appeared in the kitchen doorway. His short, spiky hair had been neatly combed and parted to one side. His face shone and looked marvellously clean. A strong smell of soap, deodorant and mint toothpaste wafted around him. As he smiled, his freshly brushed teeth sparkled. His shirt had been neatly tucked into his press-belted trousers, and the perfectly knotted tie graced his clean neck. Billy's immaculate appearance stunned Sandra, and for a fleeting moment she thought her real son had been abducted by aliens, replaced by this impressive young man. Sandra stared at Billy, clumsily stumbling over her words. "Hello? Who are you? Good morning. You look very nice, son." Frank uneasily swallowed his hot tea and then spat it across the table, nearly choking from the shock of seeing Billy. "Stone the crows," he said, gasping for air. "What on earth's happened to you?" "Good gracious," said Billy in a very well-spoken voice. "Whatever has come over you both?" He flicked a tea towel, neatly tucking it into his collar, and sat at the kitchen table, taking great care not to rest on his elbows. He glanced unfavourably at his greasy breakfast, pushed it away and stuck his stubby nose in the air. "Mother, you surely do not expect me to eat this unhealthy, high-cholesterol food. It will clog my arteries and dramatically increase my body weight in no time at all. A bowl of cereal and skim milk will do, and will be more than adequate, thank you." "Eh?" asked Sandra. "What's happened to you, son? You've gone all posh, and look at your clothes. I've never seen you look so clean and tidy in all my life." "It is of the utmost importance to look one's best whilst acquiring secondary education, Mother, and I mean to set an example. I am endeavouring to become a respectable role model for the riffraff that attend one's mediocre school. I think the dress code and low standards are quite unacceptable." "Riffraff?" said Sandra, puzzled. "Cholesterol? Cereal? I don't think you're well, son. Why don't you go back to bed? There's a good boy." Sandra put her hand upon Billy's forehead. "Well, you ain't got a temperature. I reckon that wasp did something strange to you." Frank glared at Billy, unimpressed by his pompous facade and convinced that he had played his best practical joke yet. Frank wasn't so easily taken in. Laughing out loud, he slapped Billy hard on his broad shoulders. Yeah, very, very funny, son. You almost had me and your mum going then for a minute." Billy's face looked serious. appalled by his father's vulgar attitude and bad dress sense. Going? Going where, father? He retorted, spooning his cornflakes in a refined and dignified manner. I was led to believe that you are no longer in full-time employment and will not be going anywhere. Frank shot up, almost toppling his chair, enraged by this strange son and his belittling attitude. Billy had wounded his pride and ego with one sharp stab of his well-spoken tongue. Billy thoughtlessly carried on eating his cornflakes as though he hadn't upset his furious father at all. Why, you stuck-up little, snapped Frank angrily. You'll be going over me knee in a minute if you don't stop all this posh crap. Recognising the highly volatile situation, Sandra quickly intervened. All right, Frank, leave the boy alone. He's only being polite, that's all. He means you no harm. Frank angrily knocked back his chair with his knees. You namby-pamby him too much, Sandra. He's nothing but a spoilt brat. He might have gone all posh, but he ain't got no manners, he growled, snatching his jacket from the back of the chair and throwing it over his arm. I'm going out to get some fresh air before I strangle him. Frank's early morning stroll meant a regular jaunt to the local bookmaker's, where he would back a jinxed horse destined to fall at the first fence. By the way, father, continued Billy smugly. Sandra held her breath. I thought I'd advise you on your rather drab attire. I'm afraid those awful braces you are wearing somewhat clash with your creased shirt. But this time Billy had pushed his luck too far. Frank's furious face turned bright red, and he looked as though he was about to explode. Sandra hastily grabbed her purse. Here you are, love, she said, diverting his glare to 2 coins. I've got a couple of pounds you can have. He seethed furiously and frothed at the mouth, looking fixedly into Billy's vacant eyes. Like a raging bull that had been shown a red flag, thinking better of it, he snatched the coins from Sandra's clammy hands, stormed wildly out of the kitchen, and slammed the street door behind him. I rather think father would indeed benefit from anger management classes, mother, don't you agree? He said patronisingly. Billy was ignorant of the fact that he had been only a cat's whisker away from being severely punished. Billy boy, said Sandra, deeply bothered by his behaviour. I don't know what's happened to you, but I think I'd better meet you after school and take you to see Lilith at White Witch. Very well, said Billy, carefully washing his empty bowl. Thank you for a most delightful breakfast, mother. But now I must dash. He affectionately pecked Sandra's cheek. Cheerio, mother. I hope you have a pleasant day. He grinned and limply waved him off. Pandora was chatting to a small group of girlfriends waiting for the school bell to ring. Suddenly her gaze was diverted to an immaculate boy looking remarkably like Billy Smith. He smiled and nodded his head. Pandora blinked and then looked again, surprised at Billy's smart appearance. But clothes maketh not the man, she quoted to herself, and waited for a sarcastic remark. Good morning, Pandora, said Billy respectfully. May I say that silk ribbon in your hair is rather becoming? An angry expression swept across Pandora's face. Oh, that's extremely funny. I'm sure you know you now have one of your vile remarks in store for me. I do not, said Billy. I'm merely paying you a compliment. Pandora studied Billy's swollen nose and smirked. Well, let me return the compliment by saying that your swollen nose suits your fat face. Ah, yes, I had the most unfortunate encounter with a wasp last night, said Billy, conveniently ignoring Pandora's cutting remark. How unfortunate for the poor wasp, she muttered. The head teacher rang the school bell noisily, signalling everyone to attend class. Without warning, Paul Podrick leapt onto Billy's back. Watcha, Bill, he said playfully. How are you, mate? I saw you having a go at paying boring. Pain in the bum, if you ask me. Paul suddenly eyed Billy's swollen nose and burst into fits of laughter. Crikey, Bill, who punched you on the nose? I bet you gave him a good beating, though. Paul's accusation of petty fights and bad behaviour appalled Billy. "No one punched my nose," he said indignantly, "and I didn't beat anyone up either." "Craw, what are you up to, Bill?" Paul sniggered. "You can't fool your old mate Podders." "Psst, Bill, look what I've got." He drew a tube of unopened superglue out of his trouser pocket. "It's for Miss Atkins, the maths teacher. I'm going to stick her to a chair. I bet she's wearing those stupid long white socks again today." Billy wasn't impressed by his crude friend's childish plan and thought it his duty as a law-abiding citizen to report the inconsiderate act to his maths teacher. "If I hear that you've upset Miss Atkins with your ridiculous practical joke, I shall report you to the head mistress," he said with conviction. Paul looked unimpressed, but then thought better of Billy's out-of-character threat. Billy had obviously planned to convince his classmates that he had turned over a new leaf, but Paul knew his mischievous friend better than anyone. He nudged Billy's stomach. "Yeah, of course you will," he said, winking at him and ruffling his sticky hair. "What have you got in your hair? It's disgusting," he said, wiping his hand on his trousers. Billy pulled out a comb and straightened his hair. Paul scowled at him. Billy's pathetic behaviour was beginning to agitate him immensely. "Good morning, everyone," said Mrs. Rowlands. "I hope you all remembered the homework that I set you last week. Please answer when your name is being called for the register, and then hand in your lovely completed work." After calling several times, Mrs. Rowlands eventually came to Billy's. Would it be that his father had accidentally used his homework as toilet tissue after his mother had forgotten to buy some that day? Or had Billy compassionately donated his book to a poor homeless person who needed it to keep his fires burning, she wondered. "I am present, Mrs. Rowlands," answered Billy graciously. Mrs. Rowlands looked around the class, expecting Billy to be sitting at the back with Paul, catapulting screwed up pieces of paper with their rulers. But Billy was sitting right near the front, keeping far away from Paul. Muffled sniggers filled the air as he proudly ambled to the front of the class and successfully slapped his homework on her desk. There were surprised gasps. Was this really Billy Smith handing in his homework on time? And he hadn't even bribed Sean Willis with a packet of sweets to copy his work for him. Paul, of course, had bribed Sean, promised him 2 goes of his computer game. "Why, thank you, Billy," hesitated Mrs. Rowlands. "Right, everyone, I hope you have also remembered the poems that I asked you to write for today. You never know, we may unknowingly have a budding William Wordsworth or Byron amongst us." "More like moron," muttered Pandora sarcastically. Billy had never before dreamed of volunteering to take part in anything in class, let alone read out poetry. "Can I begin with mine, Mrs. Rowlands?" he asked keenly. The room fell silent and everyone was flabbergasted. Billy opened his neatly folded piece of paper, cleared his throat and began to read. "Her hair is like the golden sun, her teeth as white as snow," he recited. "And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go," said Paul loudly. The class burst into fits of laughter. "Quiet, please, everyone," shouted Mrs. Rowlands. "Paul, I want 100 lines for that rude interruption." "Sorry, Billy. Please carry on." Billy found the next sentence and continued. "Her eyes are like twinkling stars, her smile so warm and radiant, she touches my heart like no other." He took a deep breath and sighed heavily, gazing as though he had been bewitched into Pandora's wide eyes. "But this love I dare not show, for it is only for me to know." He flopped onto his seat, smiling broadly like a Cheshire cat, very satisfied with his love poem. Pandora had hidden her scarlet face behind her hands. The girls romantically swooned, whilst the boys gagged mockingly. "Well done, Billy," said Mrs. Rowlands, wanting to encourage his newly found good behaviour and poetical sensitivity. "I think we've found our next Shakespeare." Shakespeare, snapped Paul. He's gone bloody bonkers. Another 100 lines, Paul Podrick, for swearing in class, she said. But Paul did not care if he got 1,000 lines. He and Billy often bribed his younger brother with chocolate bars to write them, and he would bribe him again. But Paul had to find another friend to share his antics with, now that Billy was acting as though he had been put under a wretched love spell. The school bell rang out, and the class hastily gathered their books, heading off to their next lesson of the day. "Oi," said Paul, tugging at Billy's arm. "What's up with you? Have you gone soft or something? Love poems? What's that all about? You ain't right on the head today, Bill." "I'm perfectly fine," said Billy. "You simply do not appreciate poetry and how it feels to have true love beat within one's heart. It appears to me that all you are concerned about is beating up innocent people. Well, I no longer participate in such vulgar activity. Now, if you don't mind, I'm late." He collected his books, breezed past Paul, and went off to his lesson, leaving his ex-best friend bewildered. Later that day, Sandra met Billy at the school gates, and he proudly presented her with a signed record of angelic behaviour. His grades were above average, yet another shock for Sandra, and although she didn't mind Billy's new persona, she was afraid that she had had some kind of influence on it. Instead of dragging his feet, Billy walked briskly beside his mother, happily chatting about his fulfilling day at school. It wasn't at all necessary to scream at him to keep up or entice him with a jam donut from the village bakery. "And physics, Mother," he gloated. "I most enjoyed maths and physics. Oh, yes, and chemistry, of course. I'm certain that after my school education, I'd like to go to university and study to be a great scientist. You and Father will have to pay, of course, but I will gladly contribute to my keep. I'll get a part-time position somewhere. I may even become the next Einstein, and you will both be extremely proud of me." "Yes, Billy boy, that sounds ever so good, son," said Sandra, going along with Billy's delusions. The son that she remembered was intent on becoming an ice cream man and wanted to own his own burger bar. In fact, any job that involved food had been a realistic option. Isabel had called into the shop after school and was busily dusting and sorting out books. Sandra prayed that Lilith had a spell to rectify Billy's strange behaviour. "Hello, Izzy. How are you?" she asked. "Hi, Sandra. Hi, Billy," said Isabel, amazed to see him looking so smart and clean. Sandra glanced sideways at him. "We've got a bit of a problem," she said softly. "Go and look at the books, Bill." Billy shrugged his shoulders and did as he was told. He walked towards a shelf and withdrew a book entitled King Arthur and the Holy Grail. Fascinated, he sifted through its pages, reading it quietly to himself. Lilith looked mystified and couldn't help but stare at him. He'd never behaved in shop for as long as she had known him. "What happened?" asked Lilith. "And why is his nose so big and red?" "I don't know," answered Sandra. "But I've got a funny feeling something happened to him last night. He's not been right since. He's been so nice and polite. That ain't like my Billy. I think it's what I said. I went and blew the shed roof off using that spell you gave me. I did it all properly like you said. But Billy got his nose stung by a wasp hiding in his jam donut, and he said it winked at him." Isabel looked as gobsmacked as Lilith. "And then," continued Sandra, "he came screaming down the garden to me when I was in the middle of my spell, and I shouted, 'I wish you'd have some manners,' and I think my wish come true. You can see it for yourself." "Yes, I can, Sandra. But I must say I'm very surprised. I never thought you had it in you," said Lilith. "At exactly what time did this happen?" "I don't know, about 9 o'clock, I suppose. It looks like I'm a witch after all, don't it? Just like you and Izzy. I must tell all my friends. I expect they'll queue at me door." She animatedly raised her voice. "Sandra the sorceress. How exciting. Woman of mystery and magic. What do you think, Izzy? She said, drifting off into a magical world of her own. Well, maybe, Sandra, replied Isabel, with uncertainty in her voice. The thought of Sandra running around Spiton claiming she was a powerful sorceress sent cold shivers down Isabel's spine. I'd prefer you to refrain from casting spells for other people, for the time being anyway, advised Lilith. First we need to sort Billy out, Sandra. Billy felt 3 pairs of eyes staring penetratingly at him and looked up from the pages of his gripping book. May I ask, is there anything wrong? He asked politely. Please excuse my ignorance, won't you? I'm terribly engrossed in this wonderful book. No need to apologise, said Isabel. We're perfectly fine as you are. He smiled and continued reading. The moon was full last night, Sandra, and I expect that made your spell very powerful. Perhaps Grandma and I should sort this out with you tonight. Sandra nodded. All right. After all, you've both been doing magic much longer than I have. I suppose I am a novice witch, ain't I? Isabel thought they had mistakenly unleashed Sandra's hidden potential. Soon there would be countless people walking around the village with green spots and blue tongues after encountering Sandra the sorceress. But Lily felt there was a perfectly good explanation, which was that it was by sheer coincidence that Sandra had cast a spell at the exact time that she herself had performed magic to help the Smith family. The 2 spells had somehow miraculously intertwined, and Lilith had dramatically increased Sandra's heartfelt wish to make Billy's behaviour better. Come on, son, said Sandra attentively. Let's go home and get some dinner. Very well, mother, said Billy, shutting his book and placing it back in its rightful place. I do hope that on this hot summer's day we'll enjoy a crisp green salad, ripe juicy tomatoes, a lean slice of ham, and then a thin wedge of full-flavoured farmhouse cheese. Sorry to disappoint you, son, but it's bangers and mash for you, accompanied by a glass of orange squash. It was your favourite, she said. Billy smiled. Yes, that sounds delicious, mother, he said half-heartedly, accommodating her ill-thought-out menu. Eh? He's no trouble, really, is he? Gushed Sandra, tweaking his cheek. Not at the moment, thought Isabel, but after tonight he would return to his former whining, whinging, mischievous, greedy teenage self. But then Sandra and Billy's friends loved him that way.